to start, things aren't looking great. I want to ask you, is it time to panic?
Daniel, I don't think it's ever time to panic for Stanford football because I don't think anybody quite cares enough. The fan base is not going to go out and fire David Shaw. This is not going to be some major program transition. But from an on-field product perspective, it is time to panic on one side of the ball. On the other side of the ball, I'll give it a little more time. So to explain, defensively, it is definitely time to panic. I think Stanford might have one of the worst defenses in all of college football. The yards per play numbers back that up. They're second to last in the Pac-12 and 115th out of 126 teams that have played FBS football this year. That's horrific. Now, have they faced two, I think, good offenses? Yes, they have. Colorado and Oregon can both move the ball. But there is no excuse for that type of performance. The Cardinals have just one sack that puts them at 124th in the country in sacks per game. They're 120th nationally in passing and passing yards allowed per attempt. So, I mean, if you just go deep into the stats, Stanford's defense has been horrific, particularly the passing defense, whether that be the pass rush and the secondary. I think there's a lot of blame to go around there. Offensively, I'm not sure it's time to sound the alarm just yet. I mean, 14 points against Oregon was a disappointing showing on the scoreboard, but we talked about how the offensive line, the running game, showed some very encouraging signs in that game. And then it was kind of the opposite in the Colorado game where Stanford's running game was largely stymied, perhaps by situation more than anything. They just had to play catch up and throw the ball 56 times. But in the second half, that passing attack was pretty prolific and was able to lead Stanford back. So Stanford can win games. It's not time to panic because they can win shootouts, but I don't know if they can stop anybody. And if there is one source of panic for me at a program level, is Lance Anderson's job as defensive coordinator, because there's been a significant decline on that side of the ball, both recruiting and in production over the past few seasons. And I think we need to see more from him over the rest of this season.
Totally agree with you there. And just sticking with the defense, it's time to panic, right? It's confusing when we look at it. It doesn't make any sense that Lance Anderson or any of the other defensive coaches would have just stopped being able to teach how to play the read option. But for some reason, the quarterback option has been killing Stanford this year. After the game on Saturday, David Shaw, 3-word answer, it's an issue. What's happening? What's happening? That's a reason to panic, that all of a sudden it seems like coaching just isn't happening or development isn't happening, because that's something that's pretty basic in every defense in college football right now, to be able to play the quarterback option and to not give up easy rushing touchdowns to the opposing quarterback. That's been an issue. That's why I'm panicking. But to your point, yes, the offense is finding ways to click. I think there's reasons to panic around clock management, but we've seen that for many years now. And that goes back to both coaching, execution, awareness. It seems out of place for that to be a problem at Stanford, that they can't deal with a play clock that's 40 seconds every single time, and having punting in weird situations. And then another thing I want to go to, also in terms of coaching, is David Shaw's answer about a 4th and 1 call back in week 1 against Oregon. And I didn't pick up on it, went back to the tape, and I just want to read it to you because it's shocking. Here's this quote. "I don't have a chart or anything. I don't have any statistical measurements. For me, it's about how we're playing. If we're playing well and we feel like we can get it and we've got a couple of good plays in mind, then we'll do it." That's Shaw's answer for how he decides on whether or not to go for it on 4th down. This is Stanford. The top major that most people are majoring in is computer science. And for some reason, the head football coach doesn't believe in analytics. You were on KZSU this weekend with Peter Goffin, who does a lot of analysis like this, looking into when teams should go for it and the cost-benefit analysis. The fact that David Shaw doesn't have access to that same material is a little bit shocking and very worrying.
Surprising, right? It's shocking because you don't expect that from a head football coach at a place like Stanford, but it's not surprising given what else we've seen from this program. This is an offensive coaching staff that absolutely despises, seemingly so, because I think they tend to do exactly what the analytics say not to do. And I think that generally tends towards conservatism. It also tends towards a whole hell of a lot of end zone fades, which has continued so far this year. That just seems to be the go-to. And almost cost them any chance at a comeback if not for a pass interference and during that fourth quarter air raid, the Mills raid, as I'm going to start calling it. But they don't pay attention to analytics, and they are very content to take 3 points when they should not be. And I think that is going to be a huge problem for Stanford if that continues. That in their first few games, in first halves, they've done a good job of moving the ball, but they've attempted 5 field goals while only scoring 1 touchdown in first half action. That's inexcusable, particularly when you have a defense like Stanford's that's not going to slow down the other team for the entirety of the game. 3 points is a losing proposition in modern college football, particularly in the Pac-12, particularly when you have Stanford's defense. When you get in the red zone, you have to punch it in the end zone. And right now, there's 2 things going on. Number one, a reluctance to go for it on anything different than 4th and 1, which even still they're not always going for. But also, they're not play calling to get into those 4th and short opportunities. I think we saw in the Colorado game a couple times kick field goals on 4th and 5, 4th and 6. I think all 3 field goals were in that 4th and 5, 4th and 6 range. In all of those scenarios, the Cardinal had 3rd and manageable, where if you hand the ball off or make a short completion, you get into 4th and short. Now you can for sure leave the offense on the field. But that's not the type of philosophy we're seeing. We're seeing the points are points, and we're going to take them where we can get them. And then that comes back to bite you. When you have 3 successful drives, 3 field goals, your opponent has quite a few 3 and outs. You slow them down for most of the half. They hit 2 big plays for touchdowns, though, and all of a sudden they're leading. They have all the momentum going in the locker room, and then you can't withstand that third quarter surge by Colorado. So the lack of aggressiveness in the red zone is another example of ignoring analytics and another example of where Stanford's coaching staff sometimes gets in the way of its talented players.
And then when there's not talent, they're not doing enough to help them, right? In the secondary, we know there's not a lot of speed. And then we saw them get gashed for, it was a 60-yard touchdown, but it was on a 15-yard slant. They're not doing enough to help their players by blitz packages or anything to help your defense avoid some of those issues, because it's sometimes nonsensical and it's hard to watch sometimes as a fan, but as a journalist, as anybody, you're watching it, you're just a little bit confused about how Stanford is running its team. And that's why there may be an opportunity to panic, or why some people around the program have been panicking for quite some time, that they feel Stanford, especially in those years where Stanford started to dominate, where Stanford was a perennial Pac-12 favorite. That's what people got used to. And then seeing where Stanford has slid to, they lost 6 games, first time since 2006. We've been harping on that, but that's because it's such an aberration. It's weird to see that for Stanford after so long of dominating. And if there's any positives right now for me, it's Davis Mills on the offense, but that Davis Mills may not be able to do enough this year to leave after this season, and he may need to stay for a 5th year.
Right. The draft stock is not necessarily going to get to the point where he's going to be ready to leave early. I had not thought about that, but that is maybe one small pro that can come out of what is certainly shaping up to be a disappointing season. I think when you talk about the program slide, I think you hit it with that 15-yard slant that turns into a 60-yard touchdown, the lack of defensive talent. And that goes into something that folks like RJ Abadi have been tracking for a long time. Stanford's recruiting classes have been fine, but it's been heavily offensive players who have been driving those ratings. They have not been recruiting a lot of top-end defensive talent. You got a lot of 3-stars out there. You even got some former walk-ons like Thunder Keck starting. And shout out to him. I think he's played well, and I love when guys are able to rise up the depth chart. But if you're going to be competitive on a national level, if you're going to be the same Stanford program that was the 10th winningest program in college football during the 2010s, you got to be signing those 4-stars on defense. You got to have elite cover guys in the secondary, and you have to have pass rushers. The lack of a pass rush is absolutely inexcusable, and it's been that way for a couple years now, but looks like it's going to be a particularly large problem this year. I mean, Thomas Booker is doing what he can, but 1 sack on the season. 1 sack and barely any QB pressure. Sam Neuer had all day to dance around, and any quarterback with an ounce of mobility is giving Stanford fits. And guess what? Jaden Delore can move too. So I think we're going to see Stanford's defense have to adjust again to the type of quarterback that gives them problems.
And the best player that they had recruited in this past class that we had mentioned